with more questions, I think, I'm now going to hand over to our final speaker, a former colleague of mine, Louise Drumm, who's now at Edinburgh Napier, and who I heard speak at a QAA event recently on a similar topic. So over to you, Louise.
Thanks very much, Martin. Everybody, I don't have slides, so I invite you to sit back and listen. I know there's a lot going on in the chat, so you might want to kind of keep an eye on that as well. And I'm just going to share my contact details, just because I might forget to do that later on. So as Martin says, I've got more questions than I do have answers here. And I suppose what I'm proposing here is just a few provocations. I've really enjoyed the previous speakers. And I suppose with the caveat that I am experienced at teaching online. I run an MSc in blended and online education, and I have taught in hybrid modes, and I'm thinking through a lot of this as well, also as a faculty developer. And it's interesting how we're talking today about different modalities when we're using the word hybrid. And it's hard not to take hybrid artificially out of a wider context where it would be used in a conjunction with other teaching and learning approaches. So anything that I'm saying today is really taking that as a given. And I understand that the previous speakers are all talking about something that's within a wider context as well. I'd like to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, help us think about things as we're discussing and thinking about hybrid, and maybe a bit of a reality check as well. I mean, I know Martin, I have seen him teach hybrid. He is world class at it. And maybe the reality of what it's like for some of us struggling with it, the costs and benefits of this approach is something we need to think about. And the other thing, we've talked about pedagogically led teaching, but thinking about how the technologies and the pedagogies are quite entangled, and it's kind of impossible to extricate them from each other. So as I said, I've questions throughout, I've no real answers, and I have been part of institutional level conversations about kit and about staff training, and sometimes those bigger questions aren't always talked about within those contexts when people are talking about budgets, for example. There's a great article by Terry Mays called Learning Technology on Groundhog Day, and he says, and I quote, "We are frequently excited by the promise of a revolution in education through the implementation of technology. We have the technology today, and tomorrow we confidently expect to see widespread effects of its implementation. Yet curiously, tomorrow never comes." And the funny and yet very sad thing about this paper, it was actually written and published in 1995, so it's nearly 30 years old. So is hybrid somewhat overpromising, both on it being revolutionary and taking everything on balance, its benefits? So let's pause a little bit to talk about the word. This is an exciting point in time because language is shifting and it's evolving as we speak it. And actually it makes it really difficult to have meaningful conversations when we're using a word that means different things to each of us. And I also think that in a few years' time, will probably mean quite different things when we talk about hybrid. And in fact, it might age quite badly. And we might be harking back to some naive time, i.e. now, just after the pandemic, when some of us thought that digital education had broken through into the mainstream. And actually, I have a conversation I've been having recently in the past couple of months. It feels like the pendulum, as we've talked about, is swinging back very much to on-campus emphasis as well. So when we think about these phrases, think about maybe thinking back a few weeks or decades, what do you think of when you hear the words information superhighway or cyberspace or hypermedia, computer assisted learning, e-learning with or without a hyphen, web 2.0, online learning, blended learning, technology enhanced learning, you get the idea. My point here is a note of caution about reifying a word just because of what something that feels like a zeitgeist. Now, I want to pause here again and talk about access to all for education. And as Ben had some very powerful testimonies there, and I do not dispute them for a moment. Yes, making on-campus teaching accessible to students for whatever reason need to be at a distance from the campus is a real issue of access and inclusion, and it can be great. But as we talked about there, it doesn't always necessitate synchronous real-time broadcast of teaching. And as Ben pointed out, sometimes with processing speeds, asynchronous can be just as powerful. And during the situation of the pandemic, equally, I saw feedback from students with disabilities in my institution who had a very positive experience with that universal application of online learning for everybody. But like some specific accessibility practices, what gives to one group can degrade the experience or make it inaccessible to others. And some of those also might be vulnerable. My question is, what are the costs in pedagogy, in equity, and in empowerment in hybrid? So going back to Martin as a world-class expert and the rest of us, thinking about the average student and the average academic. The average academic is already engaged with 2, if not 3 entirely new pedagogical reconfigurations of their teaching in the past 2 years. We've tried breakout rooms, half the students have dropped out of the call. We've taken VLE discussion forums out of mothballs, no one's posted, and we've really missed being present with other students in the room. And we have new skills, but they have been very hard won. For students, some of them haven't really got to know their classmates. Some don't feel very comfortable in university spaces. They don't quite feel like they belong. Maybe a bit of imposter syndrome, that haven't quite felt they've earned the place for their place there. And many students have been quite demotivated and don't quite know where to put the effort and energy. They've got used to a lack of structure in the day and the week, but they still struggle with that lack of structure. So what are the affordances of not perfect, but just about okay hybrid? So pedagogies and technologies are entangled. The embedded pedagogies of technologies push us in different directions. And as in the chat we were talking earlier, I saw people talking about using technologies that weren't designed for education. And sometimes we push back, we'd use these things, but more and more learning technologies and technologies generally are nudging us, educators and students, into certain behaviors that have implications for pedagogy. A broadcast system, which also has recording facilities, sidebar, hugely beneficial for many students, for those who were there and those who were not. This can be an inhibiting factor on teaching physically, so moving around the room and interactivity and stopping so that people can think. The presence and attention of the teacher, of others, is this being diluted as the focus of everyone is split into these different spaces, physical and virtual? Broadcast or recording can be inhibiting for students online and in the room. Speaking up is hard enough. So where are we providing the digital and verbal fluency, the care, the nurture for that? Where are the safe spaces, the gentle carrots and sticks to entice students into growing that confidence to be able to engage in those online spaces? Or do we just expect them to perform because the technology says they should be able to do it? So is a hybrid enticing lecturers back into the comfort, as Martin started at the top of today, of talking at students, just as I'm doing so now, and making students into passive learners? Worse, where lecturers have the skills at time, does the high focus of students' participation favour the already confident, socially and digitally privileged? And does it disempower? Okay, thanks, Natasha. Just finishing up. Does it disempower individual students and reverse diversity? So how does hybrid, a genuine question, how can hybrid empower and give students agency in their learning? Thank you.